Hello and welcome to the Rise Up with Orriant podcast. Thank you so much for joining us for our third episode of our Orriant Book Club. I hope you have enjoyed these books, or at least you've added them to your book list of upcoming things to read. It's been really fun for us to circle back to so many of these great books that we've read and discuss them with you and one another. So thank you again. We are going to be talking about a book today called Atlas of the Heart. And before we jump in, I want to welcome Jenny again. She's kind of our standing book club member. And a new book club member, Amy Shane, who, like myself, has been with Orriant for nearly 2 decades. And she is our director of people and a fellow account executive like myself. So, Amy, welcome to the party.
Excited to be here.
Thank you so much. So again, Atlas of the Heart. I think we're going to start by talking a little bit about the author, Brené Brown. So Jenny, do you want to launch in and tell us a little bit more about truly this very inspirational author and person before we jump into the book itself?
Yes, thank you. So Brené Brown, maybe you've heard of her, maybe you haven't, but she has been around for a little bit. She's a very influential voice in the realm of vulnerability, courage, empathy, shame. That's the work that she's most well known for. So she is a researcher, an author. She is a speaker, and has just really created groundbreaking work that has touched millions of lives. So she is a doctor. She's got her PhD in social work, and she's had an incredible career as a professor and an author, as she has and a researcher, as she's really dedicated herself to just understanding the power of human connection. And you might know her most from her TED Talk on shame. That is what she is really most well known for, researching, is shame, vulnerability, and courage, and the insights that she has gained from that. And I think what's really made Brené Brown particularly remarkable and influential within this sphere is how she has sparked this global conversation about embracing vulnerability as a strength rather than a weakness. And so she writes her books in a very often personal way. She has a lot of personal anecdotes that she always puts in her writing. It's very accessible. You don't have to have your own PhD in order to understand or relate to what she's talking about. And she invites you as a reader to just explore your own story, find your own courage, discover your own vulnerability within your imperfections, within areas that you are trying to grow in. And so I think that she is an incredible person, very influential within this sphere. Whether you like her or not, you can't argue that she is very influential and has a really strong impact within this area. So I'm a big fan, obviously.
Yes, I am too. And obviously, since so much of our world has gone virtual over the last couple of years, she's really thrown her hat into the podcast world as well. And I love listening to the podcast that she's on because she's such a real person. She isn't, a geneticist where you can't understand anything that she's saying. She laughs, she giggles, she cracks jokes. She's just a normal person that is absolutely brilliant in her arena. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Check out the podcast that she's on if you haven't already. So as we launch into this book, Amy, I'll turn it over to you for a little intro of this book, Atlas of the Heart.
So I liked this one in the sense that I've known of Brené Brown. I've heard her things. I've referentially known about her, but I didn't necessarily tie into her initial topics like Jenny was talking about of shame and vulnerability. Like they didn't spark a major interest chord in me. So I didn't really invest in her. And so when this book came out and a friend of mine recommended it to me, I was a little hesitant. But the way she recommended this book to me and how I've used it, and then now I've recommended it to plenty of other people utilizing it this way, I think it is really a neat kind of approach. So she has over 6 books on the New York Times bestseller list. This is her latest one that she's published. It came out in 2021. The idea of this book is that it describes the human emotions and experiences and the language to understand them. So that's at a high level. So Jenny was talking about the specific emotions that she has maybe made a name for herself for, but with this book, it's really talking about all of the emotions and all of them. And I'm going to laugh because I bet all three of us have the big red book in front of us with all of our tabs and all of our markings, right? Or any of those can see what we're doing. And the way I utilize this book is an encyclopedia. So for those of us of our generation and up, maybe we walked into our family libraries and saw the whole 2 rows of the Britannica Encyclopedia. That's how I got through all of my schooling, was to look up the word in the corresponding book in the encyclopedia and then do my book report, right? That's how I have used Atlas of the Heart. In the initial pages, there's a table of contents, and the table of contents lists out essentially all of the various emotions and experiences that we might feel at a primary, at a kind of a high level. And how I use this book is that I went in and I found an emotion, and then I read that section. And I really loved that approach. And the reason she talks about why this is a valuable approach at the beginning of her book. So I'm going to quote her. She says, "Very few people can handle being held accountable without rationalizing, blaming, or shutting down. Without understanding, so being held accountable for our feelings, acknowledging our feelings, being aware of what they are. Without understanding our feelings, thoughts, and behavior, of how our feelings, thoughts, and behaviors work together, it's almost impossible to find our way back to ourselves and to each other. When we don't understand how our emotions shape our thoughts, our decisions, we become disembodied from our own experiences and disconnected from each other." And so I love that she is talking about our relationship with ourselves, as well as our relationship with those around us and the world around us. And so I think that's really powerful, because I think that can apply to almost anyone, whether or not you're on a journey for yourself, whether you're on a journey with somebody, or even if just you're wanting to help improve your interactions. The last quote I will say is that when we don't have the language to talk about what we're experiencing, our ability to make sense of what's happening and share it with others is severely limited. So when we can't name what's happening within ourselves, it's really hard to connect with other people. So when we can name it, language shows us that naming an experience doesn't give the experience more power. It gives us more power of understanding and meaning. And so I think each of us are going to talk about how we utilize this book specifically to name our emotions, to give some type of shape and structure to an experience that we're having, and how that gave each of us more power to go through that experience.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Can I add one more thing to your comparison? I love how you describe it as the Encyclopedia Britannica, which is what I grew up with as well. For us who the internet came to a little bit later in life. But encyclopedias we think of as being organized alphabetically, which I feel like it's important to note, because if you're like, well, I'm trying to discover how I feel, but if I don't know what I'm feeling, then how am I going to identify it? So I really like how this book isn't done alphabetically. You don't actually have to know how you feel. It's organized by experience almost. So you'll see that there's like chapter headings that are called like places we go when things are uncertain or too much. And you're like, okay, that's a feeling that I have. Like things are too much. Things are like uncertain. I don't exactly know how I'm feeling. But then you can read about, okay, what does stress feel like? What does being overwhelmed feel like? What does anxiety feel like? What is worry? What is avoidance? So it goes through all of these different emotions that are within an experience. And so it makes it very accessible and, dare I say, user friendly, in order to really learn that, like the preciseness of what you were describing, of like giving you the actual language of really defining and honing in on what you're experiencing.
Yeah. And I mean, she leans in, and the pictures in this book are great as well. Just great photographs. But again, she's really leaning into the word atlas, just again, to age all of us, opening up the atlas on a road trip. Where are we going? Are we going to north, south, east, west? What part of the country? And again, these are the places that we're going emotionally. And just for context, there's 78 different emotions that she goes through in this book. And many of us, if we're just having a dinner conversation, when we're trying to name emotions, most people it's, anger, happy, and sadness. We really can just narrow it down to those three. But this to me just really opened my eyes to we are very complex people, and we feel things so differently. And, this is helping us to do that. A lot of the times we're feeling something and we don't even understand or don't know what it is. And this book is a great place to start for that is, you know, just something is off, what is going on, or something feels really good right now. What is this? So again, using it in different ways.
Love that.
Like it, Tara. So a big thing that I've gone through in the last couple of years is I changed my relationship status, right? So I decided to go through an amicable divorce. So to Jenny's point, I went to chapter 7 in Atlas of the Heart that says places we go with others. And I was like, all right, here I go. And you can bet your bottom dollar, I went through a lot of those emotions throughout that course of the experience, right? And one of the emotions or one of the feelings or one of the name or the language items that I had to learn through that experience was boundaries. So this idea, we love boundaries. For those of us who have done any type of mental health work, right? For those of us who have done any type of therapy, boundaries are very important. And the first thing she says about boundaries is we can't connect with someone unless we're clear about where we end and where they begin. And for myself, untangling myself from a relationship and from a connection, I had to realize, okay, what is my boundary for me as an independent person versus me as part of this relationship?
And Amy, what I'm hearing you say is you didn't necessarily start Atlas of the Heart on page 1 and power all the way through the end of the book. And I did the exact same thing. This was not a front cover to back cover read. It is very much skipping around, navigating the things that are important at that moment with that emotion, with that feeling. And you kind of hop around and it's still very readable. It's not at all confusing.
Yeah, it's a book that grows with you as your life circumstances change, as your experiences change. It's something that you get to pull off the shelf again, being like, oh, we're gonna do this again. We're gonna find out what's going on within me.
Yeah, so I'll tag team onto what Amy said. So I picked up this book for a very different reason, again, through a recommendation of others, but I picked it up actually to help me navigate some strong emotions that my child was feeling. As we're going into the prepubescent world of, preteen and teen, there were strong emotions that were coming out, in a young man that I was trying to navigate and understand. So I actually picked it up not only to understand what it is that he was feeling, but also to navigate how I can best help him and or deal with him at times as a mother. So again, I'll lean into that a little bit for myself, where I ended up figuring out that disappointment was one of the main strong emotions that was taking over his world. Is his expectations were at one point, and when those expectations were not met, disappointment kicked over. And again, a lot of that, went back to the soccer field. And so, within this book, again, it's probably why I love it so much. One of the quotes that she said is, you will not always be the goal scorer, but when you're not, you better be rushing toward them. So again, to be able to turn that around and share that with my son, the disappointment is, maybe a different light. And so again, that really resonated with me. So Amy, Jenny, how did you pick up the book and utilize it?
I found it at Costco.
Yes. It was on sale.
It was sitting on the Costco table. Gotta love it. No, and this book came to me at there was not a singular event for me. I affectionately just refer to like my life was a dumpster fire. I'd experienced some complex feelings with some losses within the family, multiple losses, struggling with my relationship with my husband, which had an impact with me, with my kids, and just like it was a bit of a dumpster fire or a raging forest fire, whichever. It was somewhere on that spectrum, but it was a little bit out of control. And I did start at the beginning because I didn't know where to start, because I was feeling so much that I could not really identify what I was feeling. I was like, well, maybe this will help. And it was actually a really great place for me to start, because the very first section talks about that level of like uncertainty. What is it called? I do have my book, like Amy said, places we go when things are uncertain or too much. And I was like, great, I am in a place where I am feeling a lot of uncertainty and everything is too much. Let's go on from here. And I love, I've got my book all highlighted and everything, where it talks about this is for overwhelmed. And for me, I'd always thought of being overwhelmed as synonymous with like stress or anxious, of just being like, yeah, I'm just really overwhelmed right now. And I loved this description because it's an experience where our emotions are intense, our focus on them is moderate, and our clarity about exactly what we're feeling is low enough that we get confused when trying to identify or describe the emotions. So I felt this to my core, where I was like, yes, I am feeling my emotions at like a 10, and I'm paying attention to them at like a 4 or 5. And I understand them at like a 1 or a 2. It's like I am feeling such a high level of intensity, and I cannot tell you a single thing that I am feeling other than like, I don't feel good. I'm stressed. And I'm overwhelmed. And so it was really helpful of just being able to, just for me, start at the beginning, because that from my life experience is where I needed to start. But kind of picking apart of like, this is what your experience is like. This is the cure for this. And so for like being overwhelmed, she talks about like, you have to stop doing things. Like it's non-doing that helps with being overwhelmed, which is what I had identified for myself. And I was like, cool, 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 cool. But I also have a job and 3 children and and I'm a soccer coach, and I'm like, I can't stop. Life doesn't stop just because it's like I've decided that I'm overwhelmed. And so it really did help me just kind of like pare down to what was essential, continuing to go through the book of enforcing boundaries, of saying no, of finding a very specialized therapist that can like just like really help me start identifying those emotions that I was at like a 1 or a 2 with, where I'm like, I'm feeling a lot, but I don't know what they are. And so it was just a really great place of, I was stuck and I was frozen. And this was just a really great place of like helping me identify what that first step should be.
Mm-hmm.
I like that so much.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I have a friend who did a similar situation where she could tell that there were feelings that she needed to resolve, but she couldn't figure out what they were. And so she did the same thing. She just read through any of them and just kind of put a tick next to any of them of like, well, maybe it's that, maybe it's that, maybe it's that. And again, I think there's so much power in naming the feeling and then sitting in that and saying, okay, I'm feeling this. And again, what Brene said at the very beginning, it doesn't give power to the feeling, which I think we're maybe scared of. And maybe that's kind of old guard, why we're scared of mental health, why we're scared of a therapist, because if we bring it up, then it's there. And then I give it power and then it takes over everything. But what she's teaching us is that in fact, it gives you power by allowing to say, this is what it is. This is what I'm feeling. And okay, I need to sit with that, and I either need to work through it or I need to do something about it, or I'm just going to feel it. And maybe that's all it is.
Well, you make that sound so easy, because
what, it's not?
Because that's what I work on with my therapist, where he's like, okay, you actually have to feel this feeling. Like, or I could just intellectualize this feeling and describe it for you and experience it. But apparently I'm not allowed to do that. But I love what you're describing. Brene describes that, the term that she uses is emotional granularity, of just being able, this idea of being able to accurately recognize and label emotions. And there's a Harvard Harvard psychologist, Susan David, who talked about how learning to label emotions with nuanced vocabulary. I am struggling, you guys.
You got this.
Nuanced vocabulary can be transformative, of being able to say with acuity, of being like, I'm not stressed. I am overwhelmed. I am frozen. Like I can't tell you what like my kids' names are right now because I'm so like lost in the weeds of all of this. And the thing is that I think was really helpful for me is that it talks about very specifically being like, okay, at this point, you don't know what you need, because there are a lot of people in my life who are just like, hey, what do you need? How can I help? Because they love you and they want to help take care of you. I'm like, I don't know. I just need someone to take over my life and start doing it for me. Like, I can't tell you what my needs are. And so again, it was just this like really great, honestly transformative experience, like they were saying, of being like, oh, okay, like this is why I'm feeling this way. This is why like it's hard to get dressed in the morning. This is why like I'm like can't remember basic words. I think there was a time, Amy, that I forgot the word for minutes. Do you remember this?
Everybody, I can't ever forget it, Jenny. I really
everybody
can't.
Listening, Amy and I were in a meeting and I was trying to think of the word for minutes because we were like hour and 45, and I could not think of it. And do you remember what I called it? I called it the suffix of the clock.
She said it's just the suffix of time.
Suffix of time, that's what it was.
And we were still confused. And who in the world thinks of hours as a prefix and minutes as a suffix? But Jenny did, and that was the only word she could find. And we finally got there to minutes, but the suffix of time.
But this idea that like you're just so lost that even basic communication is just failing you. Like that's where I was at. I could not communicate on like the level that my 6-year-old communicates.
Yes, the word overwhelm was just spewing out of your ears at that point.
It was a struggle.
I do think I will say that there is a lot. We tend to want help when things are rough as well, right? But this also helped me when things were good too. So like it's a good thing as well. Two of the emotions that are listed are calm and contentment. And she says that contentment is about satisfaction, and ironically is an unsatisfying idea for a lot of people. And I love she asked this question, and this question hit me, right? If I'm very specific about my life scenario, drastically changing my trajectory, my life plan, sure, I was in a major big thing, but I was having these moments of calm and contentment, and I didn't know if that was okay. I didn't know if that was real, right? And she asked me this question one day as I'm reading the book. All things considered, how satisfied are you with your life as a whole these days? If that's not a poignant question, I don't know, right? And in that moment, I was able to read that and understand what contentment meant to me. And I was able to say, yeah, I feel great. And then again, it gives me more power, right? And it helps me understand. And I say, oh, okay, well, I'm going to lean into this contentment, this calm. I like this feeling. What have I done today in order to facilitate this? It was managing the suffix of time for me, maybe, you know?
Yep, it's so true. Yes, that's exactly where I was going to go as well. Is, this book a lot of the time as well, you see your own personal transitions as well, from going from boundaries and regret and disappointment to calm and contentment. I mean, you see the evolution of yourself and your own emotions as well. And my example that I would love to share of a little bit of that transition is I happy cry a lot, which is never a bad thing. But again, to try to explain that to other people, why are you crying? Like there's nothing, you don't hurt, you're not sad, you're not angry. What is going on? Brené Brown taught me about a word and or emotion that's bittersweet. And the quote that I would love to share with this is, the bittersweet side of appreciating life's most precious moments is the unbearable awareness that those moments are passing. It's happy. And again, appreciating that one moment. So again, happy crying is one of my emotions, and it's not bad. But again, bittersweet was something that I learned and I kind of leaned into. So I guess I'm a bittersweet person.
Well, and Amy, something that I love that you kind of skated by almost was this question of, is it okay? Am I allowed to be feeling these positive emotions as well? And if that's not the most real question, that seems so counterintuitive, where you ask so many people what they want in life, and they're like, oh, I just want to be happy. I just want my kids to be happy, blah, 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 happiness, happiness, happiness. And yet we so often feel like we need permission to sit with those positive feelings and experience those positive feelings, like when life is going well, or when we have moments that are going well. Like, I feel like people can almost feel, and I've experienced this, like feeling guilty of like of feeling positive, of like, people ask how you're doing, and it's almost like this expectation of being like, oh, things are hard, life is hard, everything's a struggle, but we're getting through it. And I love that question, because I've asked it of myself, and I think that's a question that a lot of people ask themselves, of like, is it okay? Am I allowed to feel calm? Am I allowed to feel content? Am I allowed to feel at peace? Am I allowed to feel joy and just experience all the great things that come with that too? And the answer is yes.
Mm-hmm. Shed a happy tear. Shed a happy tear.
Shed a happy tear.
Yeah. I love it. And Tara, I love that you brought up the imagery of the book. And again, I know this is more of a hearing thing, but on the very front cover, it has a very cool graphic image of the heart. And within that image, it says, we are the map makers and the travelers. Mm-hmm. And if we think about that, right? Life is made up of all of these beautiful things, and all of it truly is that map of who we are. And if we navigate it in and out, and it can be complicated, and it can be beautiful, and it can bring you to tears, and it can make you lose your words, all of it. That's why I am fairly obsessed with this book.
Yeah. Well, and Brené Brown too, she really gives us, at the very beginning, she starts with the reason why we're trying to understand this is all about connection. And on this podcast, we've talked quite a bit about connection. But again, everything that we've talked about so far, and I do want to change it just a little bit, we've been talking about our connection with ourselves, is trying to understand better. And at the very end, it says our connection with others can only be as deep as our connections with ourselves. If I don't know and understand who I am and what I need, want, and believe, I can't share myself with you. So that's what we've been talking about, so far in this first, 30 minutes of our podcast. But I want to shift that a little bit and shift that into the connection with others. So if we can't connect with others, and that was kind of our, couple podcasts, I guess it was last month, the connection with others is, where are we? Where's humankind if we're unable to connect with others? So Jenny and Amy are really, really deep in our clinical department here at Orriant with our coaches. So again, I would love to kind of open up a little bit of this discussion and how that emotional awareness of yourself, maybe I'll, send it over to Jenny, how that can help within, our relationships with others.
So I love that question. And that really is a prominent theme within this book of as we're going through all of these different emotions, she always gives some sort of cue, like she gives you a direction of where to go when you are experiencing this. And it's always driving you towards connection, and away from isolation. And that's often where, because I'm really familiar with Brené Brown's other work, she talks about that a lot with shame. So if you're familiar with Brené's work, she talks about, she uses shame specifically, about how that drives disconnection and isolation. And the counter to that, which is something that we really emphasize at Orriant and within our coaching department, is empathy. So empathy, understanding, and compassion are the counterbalance, like the counteract or the counterbalance to disconnection and isolation. Because when we practice empathy, we not only support ourselves, we are able to support others in overcoming shame and help overcoming overwhelm of like all of these other things that people are working through. and we build stronger connections through that. And so empathy and practicing empathy is at its core of really what works through that. And empathy is something that as a society we've gotten worse at, of whether that's because we're afraid like of being vulnerable, of making those connections, of our putting ourselves out there, of being able to sit in an uncomfortable situation. So often we're just not comfortable being uncomfortable. And that's something that we want to encourage as people. And that's something that if you're listening to this podcast, you might have some sort of tie to Orriant. Then I want to do a quick plug for coaching, because I love our coaches and I love what our department accomplishes. And that our coaches are there to be an empathetic, active listener. They are creating spaces that lack judgment. They're morally neutral. They are there. They get to listen to your story. They get to help guide you through your experiences, to ask you questions, to reflect back what they're hearing to you, and really empathize and offer a lot of compassion to what you're sharing. And that experience really can be transformative, because it drives you towards this ultimate goal of connection with yourself and with other people.
Absolutely. Very similar to, what a therapist does as well. That's why that's a very safe space, as Jenny's talked about before, a safe space to explore all of this. And I'm going to throw out one of the words that Brené Brown mentions in her book is, really celebrating that someone can be vulnerable enough to share that with us. So again, vulnerability is so real, but again, that is, really the magic of having that social connection. So Amy, you were going to say something as well.
I just think I feel like we've said this word a lot, but creating the space in your life for this, creating the moment, making time. That's why I love reading. That's why I love coaching sessions. That's why I love therapy sessions, is because we are saying time is of the essence. Time is what we always want more of. Time, right? I'm going to say, no, I'm going to stop. I'm going to create space because this is important. This is valuable. I'm going to put emphasis on this. And honestly, in all the years of talking with coaches, our coaches are highly trained. They are excellent conversationalists. They understand how to ask questions. But at the end of the day, almost the biggest gift that they're giving for people is to say, stop your life and create space to talk to me and about yourself and about your journey and where are you. And we're going to do that every time we talk. And so now it's all of a sudden this carved out moment, right? And for all the chaos that we have, when was the last time you sat down and you opened up a hardcover and you flipped through the paper pages? I feel like that's it, right? Because then we're saying, I value myself. I value this moment. And I'm going to lean into it and say, okay, what can I do to address my vulnerability, my shame, my guilt, my contentment, my calm, my peace, all of it, and let myself feel it, let myself be in it. So I think that's the connectivity, is to create the time and the space. And if you can invite somebody into that space that's safe and good and help you explore that, that's really, really powerful too. One of the podcasts that I listen to regularly from you two was Jenny is walking me through a mindfulness exercise, because that I'm not very good at creating space that's filled with quote unquote nothing or mindfulness, right? And I have Jenny in my head saying, come back to your breath. If you have lost yourself, come back, right? And Jenny's calm voice, right? And same thing of like, okay, if I just need a moment to just be here, maybe I can lean into some feelings that I'm having with Brené Brown. Or maybe it's that I can talk to my coach about what went well this month with my health and well-being and what I want to do for the next month.
Yep, exactly.
I love that so much. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Tara.
No, that's fine.
I was just going to say, I love your emphasis on how that drives you towards connectivity, because so often I feel like we get the messaging that to take that space and time that you were talking about, Amy, is an act of selfishness, and which maybe it is, but selfishness has been branded as a bad thing, like a morally bad thing. You shouldn't do that because it's selfish. And I believe that that's like morally neutral. I don't have strong feelings about that, but like people can get a lot of guilt of placing their needs first and at the forefront. And I love your emphasis on how that drives you to connectivity, because regardless of what is most important to you, what your core values are, if it's relationships with, your kids, with a significant other, with your family, with work, with the earth, with whatever, with God, whatever, taking care of yourself and creating that space that Amy was talking about is going to increase connection. Whereas if you do not take out that space and time, then you're only able to offer so much. You can only go so far with that connection with others. And so
Yep.
it's an investment, and I like that it's the driving force towards connectivity by investing in that space for yourself.
Yep, I'm sure we've all heard the you can't pour from an empty cup. And if any of us have, felt that or tried to pour from the empty cup, we're not very successful in doing that. That's for sure. So, yeah, finding time to, look at ourselves intuitively, push the pause button, if you will, and really examine why we're feeling the way and why we're reacting. And for me, this is the big one. Why am I reacting the way that I'm reacting to the situation or the environment or the event that's happening? So that's where my pause has to happen. And again, this book reinforced that for me is I can control my reaction if I'm in control enough to be able to do that. And sometimes we're not. So again, that's the reminder for myself is, that pause is so important. So I'm not overreacting or feeling the overwhelm that Jenny had talked about. That pause for me is really important with that, to control my reaction to what is swirling around me at any point in time.
It makes you more empathetic towards your child that you're trying to connect
Yeah.
to.
Yes. Or anyone who happens to be swirling around me at that moment.
We're always
So any closing thoughts, you guys? Within this book, it gives a lot of actionable items here, at the beginning as well as at the end of this book on how we all can utilize this. It gives 4 steps on how we can really process through the biology of things, the behaviors of things, as well as our reaction to things. So again, would always challenge people to pick up this book in a bookstore or at Costco. Check out the header, check out the intro, see if it's something that's interesting to you beyond, this podcast, because it is very actionable. And if all else fails, you just flip to the chapter like Amy and I did that resonate the most with you. So Amy, Jenny, any last thoughts on the lovely book, Atlas of the Heart, that we've been talking about?
I'll just add in, whether you're from, Amy asked a great question when we previously met prior to this podcast about who is this book for? And she pointed out something that was really important to me of, if you are super familiar with Brené Brown, you are really familiar with her work with vulnerability and courage and shame. And this book is still great for you. It is not, it still talks about shame and empathy and vulnerability and courage. Like Tara was talking about, it has 87 emotions and experiences within this book that are very different and unique from her other work. So if you're a big fan, you've consumed a lot of things from Brené Brown, this book is still for you. It is not a repetition of what you've already heard. And if you've never heard of Brené Brown and you're wondering like, well, I'm not familiar with her work, you don't need to be. Like this is a great standalone. It's going to provide valuable insights just into the complexity of human emotions and the importance of emotional intelligence. And ultimately, I hope I'm not beating a dead horse with a stick with this word, but just fostering these deep, meaningful connections with ourselves and with other people. And so if that is something that is important to you, if relationships are important to you, then I think this is a great book for you.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Biggest lesson that Jenny's ever taught me is that not everything has to have a morality. Not everything has to be good or bad. And I think if we think about that there is power in understanding. Tara's tears don't have to be bad. They can be good, or they can just be feels.
It can just be.
Yep, just be
expression of a feeling in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's power in that, of just allowing it to just be. And be in the moment and be in the space And the more and more we realize that that is the human experience, the more powerful we are. And I think the more peace that we can have within ourselves.
Yep. And I challenge all of our listeners to just be and pick up this book, whether it's personal, professional, social, whatever avenue of well-being you're looking to, improve or maybe just lean into. Allow yourself that selfish time to just pick it up and read it. So thank you so much, Jenny and Amy, for joining the Orriant Book Club yet again. We'll have another one coming next quarter, but do want to introduce next month's podcast. We actually have a physical therapist coming on, so a totally different shift from where we've been for the last couple of months within the podcast. But it is actually Healthy Aging Month. And so we are going to be talking with a physical therapist on how we can identify injury and make sure that we're taking care of ourselves as we all age. Until then, pick up this book, lean into it, feel the feels, shed a happy tear. But again, thank you so much for joining the Rise Up with Orriant podcast.
Thanks for having us.
You.